Relatively good numbers. At the time of his inauguration, he had the goodwill of the American people, and his approval ratings were north of 70%. And he had these huge numbers in Congress to back him up, and yet he hit 50% in the Gallup poll, he climbed to 50% in the Gallup poll faster than any other modern elected president except one, William Jefferson Clinton, who started at 43 on election day, not 53, and had gays in the military and early missteps that caused him to drop in the public opinion polls. I think that the president has found himself in the place that he is, and his party has found itself in the one place that it is, because of two allied and sort of coincident factors. What he has done in office and how he's done it. Let me talk a little bit first about the what he has done, and then talk about the how. The what has been started off with the stimulus, and I thought the idea of the president calling for a stimulus in the economy was a smart thing to do, and he did so even before he got into office. Signaled, in fact, in December 2008 that he wanted a stimulus and gave some explanation of what he wanted to see of its size and nature. But he raised expectations, and when they passed the $787 billion surplus, which was later found out to be cost $814 billion, he raised people's expectations as to what it would achieve. There's a remarkable document that you can actually draw down. It's not a bad, it's a short read. It's available on the internet. Just go on the internet and Google Romer, Bernstein, stimulus, January, 2009, and they'll pop up a document issued on January 9th of 2009 that gives the philosophical underpinnings of the stimulus. And this is the source of the famous chart. The chart that says if we do nothing as a nation, unemployment will rise to nearly 10% and decline and remain above 9% for the balance of 2009 and throughout most, if not all, of 2010. However, if we pass the stimulus plan, unemployment will top out at 8% by the end of the summer of 2009 and decline thereafter, getting down to the 6 to 7% range by the time of the end of 2010. We're getting the economic performance they promised us if we did nothing. The president said this would go for shovel-ready projects, the money would go out right away, and that we would see 3,750,000 jobs created or saved. It hasn't worked out that way. And it turned out to be wildly unpopular as a result. You put on that then the explosion of spending. And I do mean an explosion. First we have the stimulus with $814 billion, and if you put in the interest cost for the next decade, it's over $1 trillion to the taxpayer for a bill that people do not think worked. When you get the New York Times CBS poll saying that 6% of the American people believe that the stimulus bill has created jobs, when the margin of error in a poll like that is 3.5 plus or minus 3.5%, you know you're in trouble. But the stimulus was part of that. But there's more spending. You may not be aware of this, but the president came in the middle of the fiscal year and asked for and got what was called the omnibus. And the omnibus spending bill increased discretionary domestic spending for the United States government 8% in the middle of the fiscal year. That's on top of the stimulus. Increased it 8% in the middle of the fiscal year. And then the president presented a budget for FY10, the fiscal year we're now in, that on top of that 8% increase, put another 12% into the baseline. So between January 20th and October 1st of last year, the federal government increased the size of discretionary domestic spending by 25% in less than 10 months. If you look at what that means is between the stimulus bill and what it means to the budget, and take a look at the president's spending plan for 2010 and his spending plan out into the future, and the federal government will spend $4.4 trillion more over the next decade than it was projected to spend as of the day the president came into office. That's a lot of money, even in Washington. And as a result, we've gone from a place where the deficits, which were roughly 30-some-odd% of GDP, are now on their way to being nearly 80% of GDP at the end of the 10-year fiscal window. Now the problem is the president ran as a fiscal conservative, in a way. He talked about how he wanted to cut taxes for everybody who made less than $250,000 a year, and he emphasized cutting taxes. Didn't spend as much time talking about raising taxes. He was for raising taxes, but there was an inequality in the amount of time that he spent on one subject versus the other. I was sort of irritated with one of my assistants, so I said, you got to read every Obama speech between June and November. I was really irritated with it. I said, I want you to go through it. I want you to actually, she gave it to the intern to do it, and I checked her work. They actually did pretty good work. It's an interesting little study. They went through and added up every word that he devoted to taxes, and then divided it into raising taxes and cutting taxes. Between June and November, for every one word that he devoted to raising taxes, he devoted 4 words to cutting taxes. And when he talked about raising taxes, most of the time he said he wanted to, quote, return the tax rates to where they were under Bill Clinton, not exactly a stirring call to tax the rich. In fact, in the most widely watched speech in the entire campaign, the Denver Convention speech, President Obama does not talk about raising taxes 1 second. Talk about the deficits by decrying the deficits of the Bush years, which had run 2.1% of GDP, slightly above the post-World War II average of 1.6%. And he talked about cutting government. He said, quote, I'll scrub the budget line by line and end government programs that do no work. He presented himself as a centrist, and yet has governed distinctly different. And I think the disconnect in people's minds has made their reaction to what he's done even more powerful.